brief overview of the agenda for tonight. So first, we will introduce Dr. Dorothy Riddle, who will be sort of the star of the show, giving us an overview of her work and what she has been up to in the area of hidden or limited mobility disabilities. She'll speak for about 25 minutes, and then there'll be a question and answer period. So, but feel free, like in the meantime, to put your questions in the chat if that happens. You know, if you think of these in the moment, we'll go through them at the end and go through them one by one and have a discussion about those questions and get them answered. Followed by, at the end, I thought we just have an open discussion. You know, this is a fairly intimate webinar. So I just have a few questions for you all, whether you want to participate by the chat or if you want to just, you know, unmute the volume, that's fine as well. So anyway, so there'll be a bit of time at the end designated for that. And then we'll sort of close off for the evening. I know that Dorothy as well has some resources that she's developed for us on how to sort of navigate life with a hidden or mobility disability or a limited mobility disability, however you want to call it. So that and the final video, you know, of this webinar will be available on our YouTube channel after, and we'll share that with you all in case you wish to have a copy. So with that, I will move on to introducing Dorothy.
Double strength Kool-Aid electrolyte. So it is red.
Oh, I thought that was, oh, there she goes. That was Amanda. All right. So with that, I will just move on to introducing Dorothy, and then I'll sort of hand it over to her for the next 25 minutes. So we're fortunate to have Dr. Dorothy Riddle here. So I'm just going to have a very brief intro about who she is. She contracted osteoarthritis herself in 2002, but she has a, you know, she grew up hiking and hiking in the mountains. So being active was an important part of her life. She now uses a cane and a transit chair. And I guess taking these lived experiences, she launched research on limited mobility in 2017 and founded the Hidden Mobility Disabilities Alliance. So she's now heading up a 3-year research project about this topic, and, you know, had approached us with CAPA to see if this would be a topic of interest. And so many did note, you know, a big interest. I mean, even as myself, as someone living with hidden mobility disability, you know, I've experienced some of those challenges where people don't always see some of the limitations I have, like whether it be standing for long periods of time, not having a place to sit down that's always easily accessible. So I do think that this material is going to be very, very useful for everybody in our community. So with that, I will stop sharing, and then I'll pass it off to Dorothy to do her presentation.
Thank you very much, Lori. And hello, everyone. I realized that we, you know, our research project that we're funded by Accessibility Standards Canada is ongoing. It ends next March, and we have a new finding, which is actually not in this slide deck. So let me just speak to that right away. And that is that many people with limited mobility do not go out until they have planned ahead. They try to get information about how much they're going to have to be walking. And so we've been working with federal departments to try to get them to put that information on their websites. So that's the latest research update. If we can go to the next slide, please. So when I use the term limited mobility, what I'm talking about is being able to walk, but not far, and to stand unsupported, but not for very long, without having serious health consequences. And there are at least 30 health consequences that we've documented The most common being osteoarthritis, COPD, and heart disease. That can lead to limited mobility. Next slide, please. So we all know that there are many forms of arthritis, but osteoarthritis happens to be the second most common chronic condition in Canada. And those with osteoarthritis are particularly likely to have limited mobility. I just want to pause for a moment and say that while I've had osteoarthritis for a number of years, it never occurred to me until 2017 that the difficulty that I had walking might actually be a consequence of the interaction between how far I could physically walk and how the external environment was set up. I just thought it was my problem, which is a very common response that we get in focus groups. Next slide. So the main challenges that those of us with limited mobility face are, first of all, we appear to be normal because we do walk and we may not use any kind of device. I use a cane most of the time, but not all of the time, for example. We may have good days when we walk longer, and then we raise expectations that we'll always be able to walk that far, which isn't true. We have to deal with the exhaustion of constant self-advocacy, constantly saying to people, no, I'm sorry, I can't walk that far. For example, when I take my car in to be serviced, asking them to bring the car to me instead of having me walk just over there to a space that's about 100 meters away. And one of the things that we have found in our research funded by Accessibility Standards Canada is that right now, accessibility standards focus only on the mobility issues of wheeled devices, and they say nothing about persons who have difficulty walking very far. Next slide. So there's a couple of little illustrations I've put in here. They've been done by Valerie Ward. I want to give her credit for that. But you can see here this little HMD person, Hidden Mobility Disability person. How is she going to get to the clinic? The stairs are way too long, and the ramp, of course, for the wheel devices is even longer. So this is often a challenge. Next, please. So I've said that there are consequences of walking too far, and what we've documented is the first one being increased joint pain, increased difficulty breathing, walking more slowly until you're almost not moving. I run into this if I have to go across a large open space, for example, beginning to stagger and lose balance, becoming immobilized by pain and not being able to walk any further, but having no alternative, and then having trouble walking at all the next day. Next. So what's too far? What we found in our research is that on average, 15 meters is a comfortable, quote, short distance. And that's about 1.5 school buses, just to give you a visual of how far that is. People who don't have limited mobility may think that 6 school buses is a short distance. It's very handy. My partner, for example, will look at it at someplace where we're going for the first time, and she'll scope it out. She'll come back. She'll say, you're going to have to walk about 2 school buses. What do you think? So that's the measurement that we've come up with. Next. And those of you that deal with limited mobility, you know that there's this contradiction. My doctor will say, keep walking. Don't get a wheelchair. Don't get a scooter. I want you to stay mobile as long as possible. And then they'll say, don't walk so far that you start having more pain. Well, how do you know where that point is? It's very challenging. Next. The primary personal consequence that we deal with that may get overlooked is restricted community participation or social isolation. And there's actually been a lot in the literature lately about the consequences, the negative consequences of social isolation. So for example, if I need a prescription from my pharmacy, I can't walk all the way into the back of the pharmacy to get it. I need to have my partner or someone come with me, or I need to have the pharmacy staff be willing to bring it out to my car. Many social gatherings are set up like networking events where most people are standing. Well, that's a problem. Or, for example, voting as a civic activity, where in order to get to the voting booth, you have to walk much further than 15 meters, and then you may not even be able to sit down. And so we have this restriction, although the Accessible Canada Act says that all of us must have barrier-free access to free and equal participation. Next, please. The next personal consequence is the social pressure to walk further than is healthy. So there's not only the individual comments like it's just over there, which is more than 15 meters, but also the federal government has a common vision and, let's get moving, and it stresses daily walking of much more than 15 meters. So there's this constant pressure to walk more than 15 meters. Next. So what are some of the characteristics of people with limited mobility? How would you be able to identify them? Oftentimes they'll ask how far they're going to have to walk, or they'll pause as they're walking. Or should say, I would pause as I'm walking, or gradually walk more slowly until they're almost not moving. They may have difficulty breathing, the beginning to stagger or lose balance, or they may lean on counters or other supports while they're waiting for something. So it is possible to be aware of people who have limited mobility. Next. Of course, when you walk more slowly, people get irritated. You see this woman on the moving sidewalk with everybody piling up beside her, behind her, or this sign, which I took a picture of because it literally says, don't walk slow. Next. So I thought it would be fun to do 4 little quiz questions, just for yourself to think about it. So the first one should be really easy. How far can a person usually walk comfortably? 10, 15, 20, or 30 meters? Well, I've given you the answer to that. It's 15 meters. Next one. Quiz 2. How long can a person with limited mobility comfortably stand unsupported? 1 to 2 minutes, 5, 10, 15. Only 1 minute sometimes, so 1 to 2 minutes. Next. If someone with limited mobility walks twice as far as they can comfortably walk, they will have increased pain and increased difficulty for, the answer to that is 1 day. Next. Number 4, what's the most frequent reaction to a person with limited mobility? The first reaction that we have from our research is that people are just ignored as though they're invisible. So the difficulty they're having is completely overlooked. And then followed closely by treating the person with anger or irritation. I wish the third one was true, but we haven't found it really in our research. Next. So in terms of helping ourselves, taking care of ourselves, there are 3 areas I've found that we need to work on, and I want to go over each of these in more detail. So one is managing ourselves, The second is engaging support. And the third is planning ahead. So next. So if we think about managing ourselves, the first, which seems obvious, is knowing how far you can walk safely on an average day, recognizing that this varies from day to day, based on, second point, the amount of sleep you've had, your pain level, and how much you have been walking. So one of the ways to help yourself is to schedule lightly with days off or only one demanding event a day so that you can pause and rest in between. Another is making sure that you have the ability to cancel or reschedule if you really can't walk comfortably to where you're supposed to go. And another is resisting walking as fast as those around you, because the more pressure you put on the joints as you're trying to walk faster, the faster you will develop pain. I should mention just here that we found in the research that one of the issues that people experience, I experience it, not everybody does, is that because of other health issues, we cannot take anti-inflammatory medication, which means that for me, if I walk too far and my joints get further inflamed, all I can do is just rest until that goes away, which takes sometimes up to 2 days. So sitting proactively whenever possible to take the pressure off the joints, leaning on counters or carts like in the grocery store, taking a grocery cart, even if you're not going to need it really, but using it to lean on, and recognizing that there's emotional stress from this constant social pressure to walk. So next, please. The second kind of thing that we can do for ourselves is to engage support from others. Requesting help, please bring it to me, or I need help, letting people know that there are ways in which they can be helpful to you. Another is if you're going out and there's the possibility that you might have to walk further than is comfortable, taking an advocate with you that can go for you, for example, into the pharmacy, into wherever. The third is finding ways to offset social isolation, because this is a very real thing. If you're not walking out for pleasure, one of the challenges is that you don't have those serendipitous encounters, right? That you have when you're out and about and running into people. And then you might consider wearing a button, like mobility problems aren't always obvious. Stickman Communications in the UK has a really interesting set of buttons and tags. Next. Planning ahead. And so getting information on the distance to be walked. Are there going to be mobility aids like cane chairs or manual wheelchairs that can be used if you have someone, a partner coming with you, or seating options? This is not something, at least in my experience, that very many people do, but it is possible to call ahead and talk to people about, how it is you're going to maneuver the space that you're going to. And it helps to raise their awareness as well. So the other is, I'm sorry, can we just back up one? So getting a representative is the other one that I just wanted to make sure we hadn't skipped over. Next. So here's another little cartoon. This is actually my bank. And I used to be able to get to the seated service. I can't do the standing in line, but I could get to the seated service. But now I can't, because look where it is. It's way at the back of the lobby. And so this is, again, one of the things that we're trying to do is to raise awareness of the fact that seated service needs to be at the very front. Next. So we know that in the UN Convention, the definition of disability is the interaction between our impairments and the barriers that exist externally. And an accessible environment is one where we can participate fully in all aspects of life. So next. And there are real benefits of community participation. I mentioned the first one already, the ability to meet new people accidentally, being able to socialize with others. I mean, for example, my partner goes out for a 2-hour walk every day, and then she comes back and she tells me about all the people that she's met and the experiences that she's had. So I get it vicariously, but I don't get it firsthand, which I would really love to. Being out in nature, the stimulation of participating in community events and all the discussions, being able to contribute, being a leader, a facilitator, a negotiator, whatever. And so when we have enhanced self-esteem and satisfaction, we have better overall health. So being able to be out in the community is really a blessing that some of us don't experience all the time. The primary physical challenges in community participation are being someplace where everybody is standing, or having to stand in line for service, or shopping at a supermarket or a mall where the distances are very great and there's no place to sit down and rest. And we have not only the distance within a facility, but also being able to get to the facility. Oftentimes the accessible parking is much further than 15 meters. Next. So another cartoon just to stimulate your thinking. So this is said to be a walkable city, right? 10-minute walks. And you can look at all of these people walking around, but there's the destination. And it's not really walkable for the HMD person. There's a few places to sit down, but not enough to actually get to the destination. Next. There are also emotional challenges, which we tend to, when we think of barriers, we tend to think of the physical barriers, but some of the emotional challenges are, first of all, the need to ingratiate yourself. Even when you're tired or irritable or in pain, you still have to be nice, right? So people don't get angry with you. That tension of constant self-advocacy, the pressure of guilt tripping. Now, before COVID, I did a lot of international travel as a consultant. And so I had to deal with the airlines a lot. And they would try to get me to walk from the plane up to the top of the jetway. And just sitting there, and they would get, oftentimes the staff would get quite angry because they couldn't leave themselves while there was still a passenger on the plane. But I knew that if I got up and I tried to walk up the jetway, I wouldn't make it all the way, but then where would I be? I'd be halfway up. Having to insist on being addressed directly if you have a pusher. Being ignored when you're asking for help, especially if you don't have a visible mobility aid with you. And then dealing with passive aggressive responses. This is an actual one that I got because they weren't, I was waiting, I had a connection and I was waiting for the people to come with the wheelchair to help me up the ramp and on to my next flight. And one of them said to me, if you want faster help, fly a different airline. Not the best response. Next. So some ways to improve accessibility for people that control external space. Make sure that cars can be used. This is, I don't know in your part of the country, but in Vancouver, during COVID, they started blocking off streets and moving tables, restaurant tables out into the street. I can't go anyplace if I can't go by car. So this is a real problem. And then make sure that there's close accessible parking. Making sure that when people have to wait, they can take a number and sit. And then provide seating at the building entrance. Usually by the time you've gotten there, you've walked over 15 meters from accessible parking, while waiting for elevators, so you don't have to stand all that time. Every 15 meters down long corridors or large halls. I used to do a lot of consulting with the government in those big government buildings in Ontario. I have to lean against the wall to try to rest a bit. And then provide seating for public consultations instead of doing it in a stand-up and network environment. Next. So the Hidden Mobility Disabilities Alliance, which I started when I realized that difficulties with walking were not a personal problem of mine, but were an issue that was shared by a number of people. What we do is we focus on raising awareness, educating the public about how to meet the needs of those with limited mobility, and then advocating for persons with limited mobility. Next. The project that I'm heading up is to help Accessibility Standards Canada address the barriers faced by those with limited mobility so that Canada is in fact barrier-free by 2040. Next. So we can be your partner, the HMDA can be your partner in addressing limited mobility. We have survey data since 2017. We have research on attitudes and how to address them. We have tools to assist with ensuring accessibility, and we have audit frameworks for evaluating barriers for those with limited mobility. Next. And if you're interested in any of that, you can reach us at alliance@hiddenmobilitydisabilities.com, and you can see more about limited mobility on hiddenmobilitydisabilities.com. So I'm going to turn it back over to Lori.
Thank you so much, Dorothy. And I apologize for the fan in the background, but even with, I don't know about where everyone else is, but it's quite warm here. So even with my air conditioning on, but thank you so much. I was just, I saw a lot of people in the chat, basically, relating, I think, much to some of the challenges that you express. They've experienced those sort of similar situations, myself included, that it's difficult sometimes. We can't always take all these medications to try to feel better after, it's not necessarily an option for everybody. Just even myself, I know I've had different issues at different times in my life, sometimes, especially when I was a teenager with a disability, that it often wasn't understood why I needed to stop as often as I did. At a time when people often think that you should be willing, able to just go do different things. So I don't know if anybody, I have a few questions, but I'm just wondering if anybody wanted to raise their hands or indicate their questions in the chat in terms of questions for Dorothy directly. You're more than welcome to. Oh, Nadine, you can go ahead and if you want to show yourself or not.
Yeah, I'm not going to show myself because I'm actually kind of ready for bed already. so not looking as professional as I would like. But anyway, my question is about the time frame that was given as the year 2040 for being barrier free. I wonder how I guess realistic is that with the government? I'm just kind of curious about maybe anybody's experience with any of that. you know, my experience generally with the government is that it's very slow. So I'm curious to see what people want to chime in on that one.
I'd like to speak to that initially, Nadine. The 2040 is in the legislation, but where we started from, I was actually a little appalled to find this out when we started our research, is that there was no central database of what, at least at the federal level, of what anybody was doing about accessibility. It was very difficult to know who to reach out to, who to monitor. And one of the questions that I asked of the Canadian Human Rights Commission was, how were we going to find out how far along the road we were in terms of being barrier free? Because you can't just go from here to 2040 and expect everything to change. And what I found was that there wasn't anything like that. So I've been bugging people at the federal government level on that. Not that I've been particularly successful so far, but I know from being involved in other social change initiatives that you have to have objectives along the way to move, and something that you're measuring against so that you can see what progress you're making. So this is a very important issue, Nadine.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
for-
I appreciate your answer there, and it doesn't surprise me that there wasn't any central information gathering to have as kind of that baseline, but hopefully that's being worked on so that there will be a baseline to measure progress against.
No, absolutely.
I just add one word in terms of what we've been doing in our research project. We have 11 federal agencies that we've identified as providing in-person service. In other words, service that you would have to walk a distance in order to get. And we have done staff training with each of those. We've given them specific recommendations on changes that they can make, on policies that they can adopt. And they've been very friendly, but I don't know, I don't know, and I won't know. I don't have a way to know what's actually happening.
No, thank you for that, Dorothy. And I think that's a good point, Nadine, in terms of what the, you know, how achievable is it? And I'm glad you're sort of there pushing things along, Dorothy. I'm going to maybe pass the next question to Janet Gunderson, who has her hand up. So Janet, feel free to just unmute yourself. And
you'd think I'd know to do this after 3 years of this Zoom call. Sorry. I think part of my question was answered. I wanted to know if these were like, if new legislation comes in, if it's federal or provincial, like, are there certain things that are done provincially, or is it just a standard federal regulation if things were to change?
Well, a number of provinces have accessibility initiatives within their governments as well, because we've made presentations to those groups. One of the things that's been interesting in that, and I would urge anyone that has energy to advocate, to push on this, is trying to get people to put on their websites, first of all, what accessibility supports they have, and then also what it is that you need to know in order to plan ahead, because that's a really big thing. And who can you talk to do that planning? We're having modest response so far, but we'll keep going.
One of the things I seem to notice is stores like Walmart, malls, even the lake where I walk my dog are all taking out the benches. So I tended to walk and sit for 5 minutes and walk.
Yes.
And those seats seem to be disappearing from a lot of these places. Yes.
And in interviews that we've done, part of it was COVID, because they'd have to clean the benches, right?
This was pre-COVID even, I saw it happening.
Yeah. But the other thing is that communities get concerned that homeless or unhoused people are sleeping on the benches. And so it's a conversation that we've had in a couple of communities. But yes, it's a problem because I'm like you. I mean, if I'm going to go out, I've got to be able to sit down and rest every little while.
It's interesting, the sort of intersection of the, you know, the COVID-19 pandemic and accessibility, right? And some of the unfortunate consequences for people there. So, yes, and Ingrid, I think you've got your hand up now if you want to unmute yourself and say your question.
Yeah, thanks, Lori. I was just gonna add to what Dorothy has mentioned, and maybe if Jeanette was referring, or Janet, pardon me, was referring to accessibility legislation in Ontario in particular. The fourth interim report has come up on the AODA, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities, from Rich Donovan. If you haven't read the report, it's an interesting report on how you know, the progress has been very slow. And so organizations that have a presence in Ontario can also speak to that as to the need to move faster in regards to accessibility for Ontarians living with a disability. I can also send that to you, Laura, if you're not able to find it. I have access to that report and
Yeah,
speaks
no,
to
that
that
would be.
the whole concept.
Yes, no, absolutely. No, I think that'd be helpful, and I could share it with participants here today, just if they're curious. It seems like advocacy and doing something about this is coming out in the questions, that's for sure. I was going to ask a question, if you don't mind, Dorothy. I guess as a parent with a limited mobility disability, I just wondered if any of what you found about sort of living with a disability as a parent, and a lot of those same tips, do they apply, or would there be ones that are sort of more specialized for people, you know, when they're also might have a child in a stroller and, you know, for example, and have some additional challenges with their mobility?
Yeah, there certainly are additional challenges, and it's interesting to me how different people deal with that. For some people, it creates an additional barrier. You know, it's something that they struggle against. Others, especially once the children get to be, you know, 5, 6 and older, other parents use their own experience as a good learning opportunity for their children to be sensitive to you know, what's around. I remember, this is now years ago now, I was in the Denver airport, and there's a little shuttle car that takes you from one terminal to another, and there's a bench at the back where you can sit down instead of standing and holding on to the poles. And there was a man there with a young child, I would say about 7, and he was explaining how, because they did not have a disability, they should not sit there because there were people that needed to sit there. He did a beautiful job of explaining it, and then talking with his daughter about that. I thought, isn't that wonderful? But I think that when you have responsibility for anyone other than yourself, then pacing and finding ways to rest and renew is particularly important.
Yeah, no, for sure. No, and I can appreciate, you know, you talked about, you know, using the shopping cart to lean on. I'd often use the stroller to lean on.
Yes.
And there'd be different things I do, you know, kind of building it into your routines. I guess the one thing about living with a disability, right, is you learn to adapt to so many things in the world, because the world doesn't adapt to you, right? So just using those same skills. But no, it's interesting to know. And I just, you know, also gained an appreciation for just how things weren't accessible even to people with mobility devices of various sorts, like having a limited disability with a stroller, things like that was extra challenging in some ways that way. But oh yeah, so Annette, yes, you have your non-Zoom hand up. You have to unmute yourself.
I was just thinking about transfer chairs and how limiting they are. I mean, they're handy, you can fold them up, they're lightweight, but somebody's got to push you.
That's
right. And so you're totally losing independence. It must be difficult. And well, I've had that experience when I've had surgeries on my feet, and it's just, we gave it away. I'm so unenthusiastic. We've got one of those walking sticks you can fold down into a chair, but it's heavy and awkward to carry around. So it's hard to find a solution.
Yeah. I used to use one of those cane chairs myself.
Yeah.
That was my solution, but I can't walk and stand far enough. And I'm fortunate that I have a partner who's willing to use a transit chair with me. And I talk about the transit chair because it's only like 18 pounds. So it can be easily lifted in and out of a car.
Right. That sounds good. Oh, and Ingrid, you have a question or comment.
You know, I've said it before, and I'm gonna say it again. Every time I hear Dorothy speak, something else comes to me through her conversations, and I think that the latest thing that has really come up to the forefront for me is that social isolation concept. You know, in terms of advocacy, I think that that's something that groups like CAPA can really push in terms of, you know, the importance for accessibility around that social portion.
Yeah, and having group activities, I mean, even if you're all physically separated, having group activities. I'm personally fortunate that I'm by nature an introvert, so I don't feel the loss of the constant social interaction as much as some people might. I also have a partner that I have an excellent relationship with, so I have that as well. But if I was entirely on my own, I wouldn't want to be on a Zoom call all the time, but it would be fun to be on a call that was a group activity.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a really good point, Ingrid and Dorothy. And with that, unless there's like any other questions for Dorothy, because I know she's, you know, here and we want to take advantage of her expertise and time, but if not, then I can just move on. I just had like a short couple of questions for all of you, right? Just sort of taking this information, you know, and what we've learned. I am going to share my screen again. Just give me a moment. Here we go. So, I mean, we've kind of like covered the first, you know, question in a lot of ways. I think we've all shared, you know, different things that we do in our everyday life. We've gotten a lot of different resources or tips from Dorothy as well. But I thought maybe I might just move on to, you know, is there anything we can do together? You know, so building on what Ingrid and Dorothy just said, you know, maybe there's, you know, events through CAPA that we can offer to sort of address some of that social isolation. Or maybe it's advocacy and supporting, you know, Dorothy and the work of the Hidden Mobility Disability Alliance, right? To sort of recognize the impacts, or maybe it's something around conference planning, you know, because I hear that can be such a big issue when people do go in person. So I thought I just, you know, anybody, you know, if you have a comment or, you know, a point to make about this, to, you can raise your hand, you can, we're a small group, so you can just unmute yourself as well, or put it in the chat. Just thought I'd open it up to see if there's anything we can do sort of all together to support people with arthritis that have these limited mobility disabilities.
Would sort of brainstorming coping strategies be beneficial? And,
Yeah.
Even create a poster or some sort of visual document?
I think that would be good. Dorothy has created a bit of a resource, but maybe we can, add to it as sort of an evergreen document, and, as we sort of identify sort of tips to navigating and that sort of thing. Nadine, yeah, go ahead.
I started talking without unmuting. That seems to be the thing for tonight. I don't really know if this is already something that CAPA does, but are there just occasional like social Zoom night where, you can hop in, have chats with me, maybe Zoom and wine, or I don't know what you want to call it, Zoom and coffee, Zoom and whatever. Just to get, I know that it kind of stinks that it would have to be done through Zoom, but with people being all over the place, that's one of the things I can think of.
Mm-hmm. No, it's definitely an idea, right? And a way for us to connect, aside from our mobility issues, there's COVID, which we're, continue to be at risk for as well. So I think virtual things, if we can design them to be fun, can be, I think, helpful for people. So that's for sure.
Even games, like you can organize now games nights completely virtually, like everybody comes together and plays. I don't know, there's a whole pile of them. Me and my family tried to do some of those during COVID because we were used to doing, game days before. And, so that's something if people are into playing different types of games.
Yeah, for sure. No, noting all this down, all very good ideas. Someone else in the chat, they put something other than being introverted like Dorothy and myself. I'm also introverted, so I can appreciate your points, Nadine and Dorothy. But they like to see provincial, federal agencies approach the government, right? And just feeling frustrated with the little progress that's sort of being made in this area over time. I mean, I think we all feel your frustration, Linda, especially when we're sitting there in pain and there's not much, or just people aren't understanding and those sort of things. So I don't know, I might ask like Ingrid and Dorothy if there's anything we can do to help support your efforts in a way other than hosting this webinar, of course, and having a discussion about it. But, if there's ways that we can help you sort of make the case or advocate to government to meet that 2040 goal. So
For myself, as Dorothy, I am very happy to do presentations to groups. This has come up quite a bit over the last 2 years, where people will be part of a public presentation that I make, or a presentation like this, and then they'll ask if I can do a presentation to their team at work or their government group that's responsible for accessibility or something like that. So if I can be helpful in that way, I'm very happy to do it.
definitely keep that in mind.
Yeah, and I was gonna add to that, so I am with the Ontario Disability Employment Network, Odin, and we are contracted to support Dorothy in all her efforts. So we are conducting focus groups where we go into a little bit more in depth into the kind of data that Dorothy is looking for and collecting that information. So, I will send the Eventbrite page where we are signing up people to participate in the focus groups and have more in-depth conversations. And I think that as a group, you come from different municipalities. You can also be asking your municipality to maybe have Dorothy speak to their accessibility groups so that the municipalities begin to think about how can they build better with accessibility in mind. I think this, again, for me, what has come up is that it's no longer just about the federal public services. For me, community, it has to be a community effort,
Yeah.
I think. And that's what my mind seems to be going to that every time I hear Dorothy, is that we need to start making communities aware
Mhm.
that a large portion of their citizens within these communities are not accessing things because mobility barriers have been built inadvertently, maybe. But yeah, I'm always happy to provide more support to Dorothy and her efforts. And I speak on behalf of all of them.
Mhm.
Yeah, well, definitely keep us in mind for anything. And I'm happy to share those opportunities, more broadly with the Kappa community, looking, I'm often trying to provide, resources for people to get involved. And, there's sort of to Linda Saxon's point here in terms of trying to support any advocacy out there or petitions or these sorts of things. Amanda as well made a comment that she'd like to see groups approaching construction associations, business associations, municipalities, and groups joining together to do that. And I would agree, Amanda, I think that's a really excellent point. I almost think we need to create a bit of a movement around this. And we've been seeing that even with the Canada Disability Benefit, for example, and some groups coming together. I mean, everyone has their different opinions, but that's allowed as well, right? But nonetheless, it's coming together to kind of bring about that change is really important. And builders of public. Oh,
Yeah, I
Yeah,
just
go
would
ahead.
like to mention that on the website, hiddenmobilitydisabilities.com, there are a series of tools for doing advocacy from different perspectives with different levels of government or different whether it's physical facilities or whatever. So I would just encourage people to look at those resources, see if there's anything there that's useful to you.
Yeah, we will take a look at that. And I was going to ask Dorothy, I know we're closing up here. We have just a few minutes left, but could you maybe briefly describe, you've also got some just sort of self-care tips and, much of what you've talked about today, but I think there's more. So I don't know if you just want to briefly describe some of those things to the people here on the webinar.
Yeah. Well, there is the handout on effective self-care for those with limited mobility, which I hope you'll make available in some way.
Yes, I will.
Yeah. To me, though, the things that I would like to underscore that I have found most important are, first of all, really paying attention to your own level of energy and pain, and taking it seriously. So that you don't overextend, because once you overextend, trying to regroup is much harder. So that's part of the managing oneself is knowing it and paying attention. And for years I didn't do that. I just assumed that it was a problem. I wasn't exercising enough, or there was at all kinds of, or I wasn't eating right. There was all kinds of reasons why I was having difficulty rather than recognizing what was really going on. And then the other thing that I would stress is reaching out for people who can be advocates to you. Now, I live in a small community off the coast of Vancouver, and I have a partner who's very helpful to me, but she goes away. So when she goes away, suppose I needed to get from Gibson's, where I live, into Vancouver and into my doctor, I would need somebody to go with me. I don't know how I would find that person necessarily. I mean, we have friends, but there's no structured way of people volunteering and saying, yeah, if you need some help, I might be somebody who could do that. So that's one of the things that's on my mind that I think would be really helpful to organize. It's hard enough to ask for help. If there's nobody to ask for help from, then it's even more difficult.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, Dorothy. And a dear friend of mine who lives with a disability is kind of going through that right now as well. And it's like finding the supports. They've put together a bit of a sign-up sheet of sorts and things like that, but it's challenging, right? To know when to ask for help. It can, you know, it's like we're not programmed to it or socialized to that, but it is really, really, really important. So definitely. And yes, I'll be sure to share that tip sheet that Dorothy has developed. I'll share it with participants of this workshop. We'll have a copy of the webinar on our website as well. And I'll share those other opportunities. So there might be other ways that you can all get involved in sort of making places, the environment, more accessible to people like us with limited mobility disabilities. So with that, I will say, you know, with 1 minute to spare until 8 o'clock, I will let you all go. And I thank you so much, Dorothy, for coming here, and Ingrid as well from ODEN. We really appreciate this talk.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. It was great information.
Thank you, everyone.